Good evening, everybody. Good evening, students of medicine and health sciences everywhere, especially my own students. This is Dr. Akra is greeting you and starting series of lecture regarding the physiology of the motor system. Thankful to the motor system, the living species on this planet can sustain their needs, satisfy their instinct, and continue surviving on the planet. Our sensory system informs us about changes taking place in the external environment, but our interaction to the surrounding environment is still not enough without taking an action expressed as motion. Motion is a characteristic feature of the all living species, including the unicellular organisms that move to seek food and avoid danger. Multicellular organisms, including a human, also move to seek food, to reproduce, to escape danger, and to examine pleasure, dancing, and sport competition, for example, in addition to maintaining healthy status by preventing obesity and metabolic syndrome. For that, motor function is the first step in behavior. Both central and peripheral nervous system are involved in the motor function, but this is integrated by sensory system, as I mentioned, by cognitive centers in the brain, and by emotion centers. For that, it is difficult to view the motor function as an independent function of the nervous system. This is due to the highly sophisticated brain regions that control the motor functions, in addition to very complex afferent and efferent pathways and complex brain circuits, in addition to numerous skeletal muscle fibers. Our story begins here with changes taking place in the external surrounding environment that would be sensed by the sensory receptors and would later be sent by the afferent neurons to the sensory centers in our brain. This includes the position of our body in the space that would be sensed by the proprioceptors, muscle spindles, Golgi tendon apparatus, and include the tactile sensation of surfaces around us, the pressure, the vibration, all of which would be sensed by the tactile sensations that would be sent by the afferent neurons to the sensory centers of the brain. All of this may be integrated with the motor centers in our brain that will interpret signal, processing them, and form an order, motor order, that would be sent by efferent neurons that are involved in cranial and spinal nerves to the skeletal muscles to form a motion, which is the first step in behavior, as we mentioned. Actually, there are two types of motion, the involuntary one and the voluntary one. Voluntary motion is manifested by reflexes taking place on the level of the spinal cord and called spinal reflexes, or on the level of the brain and called cranial reflexes. This involves the mastication reflex, by which we can chew food, swallowing reflex, stretch reflex and flexor reflex, corneal reflex. These reflectively controlled reflexes are aided by the sensory system and aim to control the posture, the balance, and the locomotion, active and passive locomotion. Although those reflexes are involuntary ones, but sometimes are interfered by our volition. For example, the micturition reflex, although it is an involuntary reflex, but cannot take place in an unconventional situation due to the interference with the frontal lobe, cognition, and willing. The other type of motion is the voluntary one. It is also called the intentional or volitional motion. This type of motion aims to control movements that are called motor skills. The motor skills are learned and developed by proceeding of time. For example, the baby can sit straight at 6 months of age, walk at first year, and jump at second year of age. There are stages of learning the motor skills, which are the cognitive stage, which determine the goal of motion and the strategies to achieve it. The associative stage is determined by tactics that can achieve the intended or planned motion, and the autonomous stage, which takes longer time. It literally means the automatically doing the task, dancing, for example. The voluntary type of motion is aided by our internal desire to move. This is formed in the frontal lobe of the brain, especially in the prefrontal cortex, where the cognitive center, willing and thinking, multitasking are found. Now, let's view the levels of organization of motor functions. Actually, there are 3 levels of organization. Level 1 or the strategic level, level 2 or the tactic level, and level 3 or the executive level. The level 1 or the strategic level actually involves 3 brain regions: the basal ganglia, the supplementary motor area, and the premotor cortex. Now, let's have a look on the brain. Here, deeply inside the white matter of the cerebrum are found gray matter accumulation of neurons that called basal ganglia. They have numerous functions involved in behavior and emotion and also in motor functions. The basal ganglia and the supplementary motor area and the premotor cortex actually form the strategic level of organization, where the initiation of movement, planning, and programming of movement take place. This collection of areas in the posterior part of the frontal lobe is collectively known as the motor cortex, involving the primary motor cortex, supplementary motor area, and the premotor cortex. But the strategic level includes also the basal ganglia, which are gray matter nuclei embedded deeply in the white matter, and the supplementary motor area and the premotor cortex. This level of organization is influenced by the sensory information like visual, auditory, and proprioception. This information is filtered to the basal ganglia and then reflected to the supplementary motor cortex and premotor cortex, where the final decision of moving is taken. On level 2 or the tactic level, the cerebellum and the primary motor cortex receives information from the strategic level, and here the tactics for achieving the desired movement are taking place and then translated to the executive level. The executive level include the spinal cord and the brainstem, medulla oblongata, and the pons, from where the cranial nerves originate, and the spinal nerve originate from the spinal cord too. Here, the order is formed and to be sent via the peripheral spinal and cranial nerves to the skeletal muscles. Talking about the peripheral cranial and spinal nerves, let's remind that an afferent neuron with all muscle fibers it innervates are collectively known as the motor unit. This is everything for now as an introduction to the motor system. During the next lecture, we will focus more on the functional anatomy of the 3 levels of organization of the motor system. Till that time, I would like to wish you a happy evening and to be always healthy and with welfare and success. Thank you for being good listeners.